In the early 1980s, deep in the highlands of Guatemala, a genocide was unfolding. Entire villages erased, families disappeared, cultures that existed for thousands of years wiped out in months.
They were united by belief and ritual, but never a single ruler or language.
All ruined by a man who claimed he was saving the nation, not by outside invaders, not by a foreign empire, but by a man named Efrain Rios Montt. And under his dictatorship, over 200,000 people were killed or disappeared.
Men were press-ganged into Montt's militias and forced to torture and kill friends and relatives. A few did it willingly to settle petty squabbles. Most killed rather than be killed.
But somehow, the world forgot. This is the mass genocide history tried to erase.
Oigan bien, señores. No aparecerán más asesinados en las orillas de las carreteras. Se irá a fusilar a quien esté en contra de la ley.
Efrain Rios Montt wasn't born a monster. He started as a soldier, disciplined, ambitious, and convinced the military was the only thing holding Guatemala together. He tried to attend the notorious School of the Americas.
Fort Benning, Georgia, on the edge of Columbus, is now home to the U.S. Army's School of the Americas. Its motto, all for one and one for all. Its official language, Spanish, not English.
¿Qué número es este?
The school's goal, to provide training for Latin American armies allied to the United States and to maintain U.S. influence over them.
But he was rejected, so he stayed in Guatemala, rising through the ranks on pure loyalty. By the time he reached the top, the country was already burning. A civil war had been raging for over 20 years. Leftist guerrillas fought the Guatemalan army. Villages were stuck in the crossfire. The indigenous Maya population, nearly half the country, was treated like an enemy threat. But nobody knew what would come next. In March 1982, a group of officers staged a coup.
For nearly 30 years, Guatemala has been dominated by deeply conservative generals who occasionally vie with each other for the spoils of the presidency. In March of this year, young army officers staged a coup and brought to power General Efrain Rios Montt.
Overthrowing the government overnight. He promised peace. He promised justice. He promised a rebirth of Guatemala. Instead, he delivered one of the worst genocides in the Western Hemisphere. Montt believed the guerrillas were everywhere. He believed the indigenous communities, especially the exil Maya, were helping the enemy. To him, the solution was simple. Eliminate the population. Eliminate the resistance. Under Montt's command, the Guatemalan military launched the infamous Scorched Earth campaign. Entire regions were declared red zones. Soldiers were ordered to destroy anything that could support life. What followed wasn't war. It was a systematic extermination. Villages were surrounded, homes burned, crops destroyed, women assaulted, children executed. In some areas, over 80% of all villages were wiped off the map. The United Nations later concluded it was genocide.
Try to answer what Daniel asked about why people don't know about Guatemala. With a very brief answer, my answer will be because obtaining silence has been the method of success for the status quo in Guatemala. Talking and doing is a way of dying.
But in 1982, the world barely noticed. To the public, Montt spoke like a hero.
Un ejército es representante de un pueblo. Las armas.
His speeches were fiery, emotional, almost religious. He claimed he was saving Guatemala from communism.
For many years, communism was the dominant economic system used in many countries across Eastern Europe and Asia. But what is communism? How did it get started? The modern idea of communism was first proposed by German philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Together, they wrote a short book known as the Communist Manifesto. In it, they suggested that someday the working class, known as the proletariat, would rise up and overthrow their wealthy employers. At that point, the proletariat would completely restructure society. One of the key principles of communism is the concept of a classless society. This led to a concerted effort by communist governments to eliminate anything that might be representative of class warfare or create class envy.
He claimed that harsh action was necessary. His most famous line, "If you're with us, we will feed you. If not, we will kill you." And he meant every word.
Eso que nunca se me va a olvidar, pues, porque pensé, pues, yo al principio pensé que ahí sí iba a terminar mi vida. Dije, ¿por qué tuvo que ser a mí?
His regiment created civil patrols, forcing villagers to spy on neighbors. Men were taken from their homes and handed rifles. If they refused, they disappeared.
During a 36-year civil war, 45,000 students, political activists, and peasants were disappeared, and 200,000 Mayan Indians were killed.
Mott's government turned civilians into soldiers, and soldiers into executors. Villagers were forced to attend re-education rallies. They were told the army was their protector, but every night, the same army dragged people from their homes, and the message was clear. There was no neutral. You were either with Mott or you were dead. So you might wonder, if an entire region was being wiped out, why didn't the world intervene? And the answer is, because the world didn't want to. The Cold War was raging.
But the Cold War was, at its core, as clear a conflict of good versus evil as World War II had been. Just like that war, the Cold War was a death match between the forces representing freedom and the forces representing totalitarianism. Because hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, died in it, the Cold War can, with good reason, be described as the Third World War.
The United States was obsessed with stopping communism in Latin America. President Ronald Reagan even praised him publicly.
Expressed my administration's support and my nation's admiration for the benefits of a democratic government elected on the principles of the rule of law. We are in agreement that we must work together to oppose those who seek to disrupt the promise of economic progress and political stability that is the legacy of peace in the Americas.
Calling him a great man of personal integrity. And while at the same time Mott's forces were burning villages and the U.S. quietly sent support, international reporters weren't even allowed near the highlands. Journalists who tried were threatened or vanished. For years, the world only saw Guatemala through Mott's filter, a filter of lies. The exiled Maya suffered the most. In some villages, over 1/3 of the population was killed. Families were separated, tortured, executed in front of each other. Children were thrown into fires. Women were assaulted by soldiers. And entire communities were erased in days. But what's worse, survivors fled to the mountains, hiding for months without food. But Mott wasn't overthrown by rebels. He wasn't captured in war. He wasn't even chased out by the people. He was replaced by his own military. In 1983, his generals decided he was too unstable, too unpredictable, so they removed him quietly. He walked away freely and lived a peaceful life for decades. But history wasn't finished. In the 2010s, human rights groups brought Mott to court. Survivors testified. Old women who lost children, men who watched their villages burn, people who survived massacres by hiding under bodies. And for the first time in Guatemalan history, a former head of state was convicted of genocide.
Report. So Jenny, give us an idea. How significant was this trial for the people there?
This is huge. This is the first time in modern history that a domestic court has convicted a former head of state on these kinds of charges: genocide, crimes against humanity.
80 years old and guilty. But the victory didn't last.
Former Guatemalan dictator Efraín Ríos Montt was sentenced to 80 years in prison after being convicted of genocide for ordering the deaths of almost 1,800 indigenous Guatemalans when he was in power for 16 months starting in 1982. But the guilty verdict was issued on May 10th, and because of this ruling, his sentence has been reversed. Guatemalan human rights groups called the ruling a legal maneuver to protect the former dictator and an abuse in the interpretation of the law.
10 days later, a higher court overturned the ruling. Mott never served a single day in prison, and he died in 2018.
Y político que ha tenido el país en el último siglo. Por eso no cabe duda, Guatemala pierde un gran hombre el día de hoy.
De la vida, y creo que es lo que más lastima, duele, da rabia pensar que él murió en su cama rodeado de sus familias y no fue el chance que tuvieron tantas víctimas que él masacró, que él desapareció y que aún seguimos buscando.
A man responsible for 200,000 dead and disappeared and never saw real punishment.